Hello friends, this video on body fluids and circulation part 19 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. Okay, so with this, let us now talk about some important application, not exactly application, some certain important things related to our heartbeat. Now, many of you would have often got your blood pressure measured. Now, what is blood pressure? Now, as I said, when the blood moves through these vessels or when they move through these tube-like structures called arteries or veins, so they actually flow under high pressure. So the pressure which the blood exerts on the walls of the blood vessels, that indicates the blood pressure. And this blood pressure is very significant because they can, if the blood pressure is not appropriate, they can cause several problems in a person. So that is why measurement of blood pressure is a very common thing. So many people visit doctors to get their blood pressure measured. In fact, if you're not well, it is quite common for the doctors to measure your blood pressure. And I'm sure that many of you would have actually gone through it, or you have seen people undergoing this, the measurement of blood pressure. So let us try to see what is this blood pressure and how is the blood pressure measured. So blood pressure is nothing but the ratio of systolic pressure to the diastolic pressure. So when we say that it is the ratio of systolic pressure to diastolic pressure. So what is this systolic pressure we are talking about? This is nothing but the ventricular systole which we are talking about. That's because that is the pressure with which blood comes out of the ventricle because of this pressure, right? Now the average blood pressure for a healthy adult is 120 by 80 millimeters of mercury. So what is this 120? 120 mm of mercury is nothing but the pressure under which blood comes out of the ventricles, and 80 is the diastolic pressure, that is the pressure which remains with the ventricles when they start to relax. As I said, now after the blood has gone out of the ventricles tend to relax. As a result, the pressure inside the ventricles tend to reduce. So that is the diastolic pressure. So this is the normal pressure, 120 by 80. Now also age also matters for some people. If their age is more, sometimes the normal pressure might be a little more than this. Now there is an instrument which is used for the measurement of blood pressure, and it is known as sphygmomanometer. Now you would have seen this if you have ever been to get your blood pressure checked. So what happens here is, now how do you check our blood pressure with the help of this instrument? You would have often seen that the doctor takes the stethoscope and he takes a very tight belt and wraps it around your on the upper side of your arm. So he wraps that very tightly, and then he has a pump like structure in his hand which he just pumps in just to check your BP, and that instrument gives him the reading of the BP. Now how does that actually happen? Let us try to understand that. So now what happens is that now the ventricles are the pumping chambers, that is, they send blood to all different parts of the body. Now if you consider your arm, so this is your arm, so here also in your hand also the blood is coming from the heart and it is coming from the ventricles of the heart, right? Now what do is they take a band and they press it tightly on your hand, on the upper arm rather. So what happens when the band is pressed very tightly? When it is pressed extremely tightly, blood flow can be heard through the stethoscope. So this is the stethoscope, so you can actually hear the flow, the sound of the flow of the blood. Now blood flow through the arteries at peak pressure is due to the ventricular systole, right? Now here you have another instrument which actually shows you the reading. Now what happens is that when you actually press it really hard, you are actually trying to increase the pressure. Now at peak pressure, the blood flow is due to the ventricular systole, because when you actually press it very hard, so the blood vessels also tend to contract, and as a result it is the systole phase. So this pressure is the systolic pressure. But when you release the band, what happens? Gradually the blood vessels start to relax. So on relaxing, the sound fades. So if you hear it with your stethoscope, the sound will fade and the pressure will also start to reduce, and finally it will reach a minimum value. That minimum value or that reading is the diastolic pressure. That is how pressure is measured. So when the band is pressed extremely tightly, you can hear it with the stethoscope, the sound of the beating of the heart, that is due to the contraction. So there you will get a reading of 120. But as soon as you release it, I mean the band is no more fastened, then what happens? As you release it, it gradually starts to decrease, the pressure gradually starts to decrease, and then it gives you the diastolic pressure. So when you press it extremely hard, what happens? The blood is not able to flow through it because you have actually pressed the blood vessels so tightly. As you release it, then the blood starts to flow and you get the diastolic pressure. So this is how you measure blood pressure. So now let us talk about the sounds which we hear with the stethoscope. Now as I said, when you press it really hard, you can actually hear the sounds of the blood flow. Now what are those sounds which we hear? When are those sounds produced which we hear? Okay, let us see. Now in each cardiac cycle, in one cycle, there are two prominent sounds which are heard. And when are these two sounds heard? The first sound is heard when the bicuspid and the tricuspid valve closes. So when the bicuspid and tricuspid valve closes, then what happens? That means that the blood has already entered from the auricles to the ventricles. Now, after it has entered into the ventricles, the bicuspid and tricuspid valve closes, and that closure gives a sound. So that is one sound which is heard, and the other sound that is heard is the closure of the pulmonary and aortic valve. So basically the sound which we are able to hear from outside, like whenever, like if you think of a heartbeat, what kind of sounds do you hear? It's like a dub 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 sound. It is like that. It's in beats. So what are those beats? Every time you hear one sound is for the closure of bicuspid and tricuspid valve. That means the blood has entered into the ventricles. The second sound is for the closure of pulmonary and aortic valve. That means the blood has gone out of the ventricles also. So these are the two prominent sounds which are heard in every cardiac cycle. And with the stethoscope, the doctor also hears those sounds, and they just see if the sounds are like in proper intervals or not. Thank you. Please visit www.examfear.com to watch more videos, attempt free online test, get free study material, find tutors and mentors. Thank you once again.